part of that ecosystem, last week we talked about some credit for prior learning and how to integrate prior learning. Today we talked about CBE, and I think sort of a third leg to that ecosystem, or the nucleus of that ecosystem, is how we represent and how we look at credit for learning, right? And for the longest time, for 100 years, we've been talking about the Carnegie unit, which is unseparable from time that we sit in our seats learning. And that's sort of been a hang up that we have in higher ed. And as we shift to a focus on what people have learned in the place of how long they spend learning that, then we need to start talking about the representation of that learning in more powerful ways. And so I'm really excited to introduce to you our next speaker, Wayne Skipper, who is going to give us a short presentation on badging or micro-credentialing. Wayne is the CEO of Concentric Sky and the mind behind a lot of the most important advances in micro-credentialing, as well as the program pathways mapper. And I think he'll definitely get the conversation started for us, and then we can follow up with some questions toward the end. But Wayne, I'm going to turn it over to you now, and you can take it away.
Excellent. And thank you so much, Bill, and to everyone for having me here today. It's an honor to be able to meet with you and to hear about all of the exciting work that you're doing. I wanted to run through a few quick slides to sort of level set some of the concepts and talk a little bit about my work and what I do and how I think it might relate to the work of your various institutions and how we can together serve students. So, my name is Wayne Skipper. I'm the founder and CEO of Concentric Sky. Concentric Sky is not your typical corporate organization. We are not a startup. We do not have investors. I formed the company 15 years ago as a software architect working to improve online education system. I've since grown the company to be about 90 people, and we're based just a little bit north of you here in Oregon. I apologize for my lack of video. I'm a little bit rural, and it makes my audio choppy if I try to have audio on. So I wanted to cover a few different things that I think you will find relevant. So if you're interested to learn more about Concentric Sky, I would point you to the Wikipedia article about us, which is quite excellent. Cover some of the things that we've done over the last 15 years. And our philosophy going into this work is how we can raise all boats through technology, rather than how we can build specific products to serve individual markets. And this makes us a unique actor in this space and has led to some of the innovations that we'll be talking about here today. I wanted to touch on a couple of things that earlier speakers had said. I was really taken with what Sonia said originally around the time that we're in right now and what we're able to do with what I think of as structured data. So taking the unstructured information of the world and putting it into machine readable and computable formats. I think that she really hit the nail right on the head about the timeliness of this work, taking CBE, using it to quantify proficiency and to better serve students by quantifying their journey. I was also really impressed with what Deb said. I really liked, Deb, your analogy of how you set the sort of the axis of proficiency versus the axis of time, CBE versus seat time. I thought that was a really excellent analogy. And I like the way you talked about recognizing modularized learning achievements, because that's a lot of what we're going to be talking about here in a moment. So moving past this first slide here, I'll talk a moment just about the Badger platform. So Badger is a system that my company wrote in 2015. A key thing to understand about us is that we are not just a company that created a digital badging platform. We worked with Mozilla and MacArthur to design the underlying technology standards upon which all digital badging is based. And it is through that work that we created the Badger platform and made it available to organizations. So we designed a number of other technology standards with a focus on interoperability, again, towards this idea of addressing equity challenges and really using technology beneficially to raise all boats in our society. So our platform is now used quite broadly around the world. We have over 25,000 organizational partners spanning 160 countries. We are endorsed by Mozilla, the only platform endorsed by Mozilla, the original creator of the digital badge. And you can find out more about that relationship at backpack.openbadges.org. We are the native badging system of Canvas, which will please many of you. We have an arrangement with Canvas that allows our system to be free to those institutions that are using Canvas. So if you're using Canvas, you can get started with the free offerings that we have there in partnership with Instructure. It's a great way to just dip your toe into the water of micro-credentials and see what they might be able to do for you. And we have, as I mentioned, a wide array of partners. The world's largest employer, Walmart, has our system now being deployed across the entire 1.5 million employees they have in the United States. The largest public university, ASU, uses our technology, as well as SNHU, WGU, and thousands of other institutions, including quite a few of those, both at the CCC, CSU, and UC levels in the state of California. So I want to talk a little bit about the Program Pathways Mapper, which is one of my favorite projects in the whole world. And what I love about this project is that it solves a couple of key problems for institutions, problems that really didn't seem that great at the beginning when we started the project, but as we've explored the value of what they do, we've seen great efficacy. And I'm a big efficacy guy. I like to know that the things that we do actually work and have the outcomes that we are seeking. So what the Program Pathways Mapper does is to create what we think of as a single source of truth for institutions. We have built a tool that we call simply the data cleanup tool, whose job is really to correct inaccuracies between things like MIS codes and catalogs and other places where human data entry might have created information that isn't completely correct that might be surfaced to a student. And once we have this single source of truth created, obviously pushed back through the appropriate curriculum committee at the institution, we have this idealized model of a pathway for a student. Then we can start to do some really interesting things with it, such as build these kinds of visualizations. So this is the Bakersfield College Computer Science program. And you can see this is what I call a registrar-friendly or traditional way of thinking about a learning journey for a student. So this is based on time. You can see the courses here in their appropriate sequence. And what this doesn't really tell you, though, are the specific learning outcomes that one might develop as part of each individual course. It's fairly generalized. So when we start to think about how you move from this traditional representation to a competency or skills-based representation, what I generally tell institutions is that it's not necessarily an either-or proposition. You can actually do both at the same time. And this is a comfortable place for a lot of institutions as you're trying to understand how you can justify to the faculty and how the faculty can get their heads around the amount of work that is needed to start creating skills-aligned student learning outcomes at the institution. It's a lot of work, right? So we have to see clear benefits to the institution, to the faculty, to the students to do that. And this tool allows us to do that in a way that is really visual. Faculty really enjoy working with the authoring of these. It helps us find challenging situations where maybe something didn't work exactly as we thought it would when we were looking at it on paper. So it's really nice to have it visualized. And we find that there's great efficacy visualizing it for the students as well. So when I start thinking about skills and how we might map them to this more traditional representation, what I would say is that you might have a shared student learning objective across, say, 3 of these courses, say teamwork or leadership or some soft skill, and that you might want the student to demonstrate it in one place, but not necessarily in each of the 3 courses 3 different times. And so you could think of a single competency representing something that spans multiple courses. And then you could see that there might be other overlapping pieces here where teamwork is developed in one area, another skill in another. And you can start to think of what I call a meta student journey, which represents the skills that one might develop while you're going through the coursework. And this is how we can map the skills that are associated with the learning outcomes in each course. with competencies and micro-credentials. And there's a lot of really interesting work that you can find on the Bakersfield College website about what we've been able to do here with Program Mapper and its efficacy, particularly addressing equitable outcomes. So with that as a foundation, I wanted to ask and answer a couple of key questions, because I find that these are often things that are misunderstood by people. And the first is, well, what is a micro-credential? You know, what are these things that we're talking about? And the answer to this question is that it is not a digital sticker, right? And this is where a lot of people get tripped up by the name badge. I like to say that Open Badges is a really terrible name for a really excellent technology standard. So what a digital badge is a set of information that is digitally verifiable that describes information about a learning achievement. You can see what those pieces of information are over here. What a badge is not is just a picture. The picture is the vehicle by which the credential moves around. And this is the most important thing to understand about a digital badge, right? It's not just a pictographic representation that anybody can hold up and say, oh, look, I have the picture. What we did with Mozilla and MacArthur is we created a way of moving digitally verifiable information about learning achievements from point A to point B inside of an image. This allowed us to get images up to LinkedIn and Facebook. You can share them in email, download them, upload them in the file system, because those systems all work with images natively. So we didn't have to go build a bunch of integrations and APIs. That's what a micro-credential is. It's an image that contains the data that describes the learning achievement in quite a bit of detail. So for example, you have the name of the credential, criteria under which it might be issued, obviously the image, information about the issuer, etc. In particular, what is interesting here is information about what we think of as alignments. This can align out to skills frameworks that really are, I think, what is the wind under the wings of digital credentials and micro-credentialing today. This ability to take the aforementioned skills that might be associated with a student learning outcome in a course and attach it to a digital credential. So you can say this credential represents proficiency against this skill. And you can't see me pointing, unfortunately, I don't have my video on. But you know, what you're pointing at is what we think of as a Rosetta Stone that describes what the skill is and how one might measure that proficiency. So for example, you might issue a digital credential to somebody for a welding certificate. You might attach a video of that student doing a weld and the rubric used to assess that evidence. All of that travels as a package, and an employer can look at that, see the evidence of proficiency, understand the rubric used to assess that proficiency, right? And then decide for themselves how to value it. So very powerful technology. We have issued collectively as an industry about 43 million credentials around the world to date is our current estimate. So the second thing I like to cover when I talk about micro-credentials, and I'll try to be brief, this is my area of interest, so I talk a lot about this stuff. But the second thing I like to cover is that a digital badge is not intended to be a new form of recognition. So in education, you have the existing ontology of recognition. You have degrees and diplomas and certificates and certifications. And so a lot of educators look at a digital badge and think, great, throw it on the pile, right? We'll find something to do with it. We'll recognize a skill. Maybe we'll gamify a course. And those are valuable uses of digital badges. But our original intent with Mozilla and MacArthur was to create a common syntax in which you could express any form of recognition. So that degree, that diploma, that certificate, that certification, all of those can then be represented in this portable package that serves the learner. In the same way, you might give a learner a PDF version of a paper degree because it will be more useful to them. You might also give them a portable digital representation of that credential. And that's what badges are for. So with that, I'll move on to the next concept here, which is really stackable learning pathways, which is, well, what do you do with the digital badge? Why would anybody want one, right? What value does this provide to our learners, and how can we use that to better serve them? And so the answer to this is the creation of another standard written by my company, which is called Open Pathways. This is an open technical standard that anybody can use. It's not tied to our product. It's not tied to any particular system. It's an open standard. And this allows us to take any badge from any platform and stack them together into a system of meaning. That system of meaning might be a common course sequence, program sequence. It might be a competency framework, think AAC and U value rubrics, some sort of 21st century skills rubric, or a marketable skills progression used by an employer. And as you take these, you have rules that apply to whether you are counting each one of these. And I'll talk about how this is really valuable when you're starting to think about equitable outcomes and recognizing prior learning here in a moment. But you can take any badge from any platform, a Badger badge, a Moodle badge, a badge from Blackboard or D2L, or any of 1,000 different platforms that issue open badges. You can ingest these badges, set rules around recognizing the value of these badges inside of your institution or across institutional boundaries. And we call these pathways stackable because they begin and end with badges. This means that the badge that ends one pathway can begin another badge or begin another pathway at the same institution or at another institution. So for example, this might be an AP badge offered in a dual enrollment setting with a community college partner. The badge might be the evidence of the student's proficiency demonstrated in that AP setting. And this could open up a learning pathway in a CTE program at a community college. This might be a 2-year CTE program that then articulates into a 4-year college setting. This might be a continuing ed credential that then becomes part of an employer training pathway. And these are all real world use cases for us. We do all of these with these technologies today. One example that I think is particularly interesting in California is the ability to create a badge, say at a non-accredited institution, and then use that to begin a pathway at an accredited institution. So you can see various types of training programs, boot camps, other types of systems that can then start to feed you these artifacts that you can use to recognize prior learning in whatever setting it might occur. And then, because we can point to skills frameworks, we can use this to have sort of an either or choice between the credentials that we might accept, which allows us to address learning that happens across a wide variety of settings. And this is how we can start to use these technologies to address and create more equitable outcomes for our students. So there's a lot of talk about competency-based education, and I think of competency-based education to a certain extent as pushing on a string, right? You need employers to be pulling on that string, right? So if the goal here is to improve employment outcomes for our students, what we have to help employers do is to start thinking in terms of skills and competencies. And you'll be glad to hear that there is a very large amount of work happening in this space today to help employers and institutions build these frameworks that they can then rely on together for doing exactly this sort of skills matching. We're answering what I think of as an essential question here. What is a skill? Which is a question that Deb asked earlier. What is a competency? What do these things mean? And I would direct you to openskillsnetwork.org, which is an organization that we've set up with some partners, institutional partners, employer partners, working on solving exactly these problems today. So briefly, I know I'm running a little long. I will try to cover a couple of case studies here just momentarily to talk about what you might do with a digital badge. And this is one of my favorite programs with our partner, Southern New Hampshire University. And what I like about this program is that it guides youth in underserved communities into the mainstream of work and employment. And the way that we've done this is that we've created these badges, these programs that align with the passions and interests of the student, going where the student is, finding out what interests them, what inspires them, finding a way to recognize that as a valuable learning for them, and then starting to build those into pathways that then start to connect into more mainstream types of employment and education outcomes for them. So for example, you might have a student that's interested in fashion. Lovely. Did you know that that could be a career? Did you know that you could build a career around wearable technologies? Right? These are the sorts of pathways that we can open for students if we better understand where they are, what interests them, and we help to sort of tease out the skills and proficiencies that they've already developed in whatever setting that they find themselves. And so what we've done here with the LRNG program is to build exactly this, where we help students identify their passions and interests, And then we start connecting those to opportunities and programs offered by major brand partners. So for example, Best Buy and Gap both participate in this program where they help people not just identify skills that interest them, but skills that are relevant to the workforce. And then one of the outcomes here is the ability to interview for a job, directly connecting the students, using their interests to the sorts of outcomes that we hope to find for them. And then the next level with this is to start connecting them actually into 4-credit programs. And this is something that SNHU has really taken a leadership position on, which is accepting these badges for college credit. And so this is a really excellent program. I would point you to lrng.org if you're interested in learning more about it. I think that it is a valuable model and one that might be considered in other regions and other states. This is primarily something they're doing in the Northwest, Midwest at the moment. So the second case study is Digital Promise. Digital Promise is an organization that credentials educators, primarily K-12 educators. And what we've done is we've created a very rigorous system of assessment where a teacher will submit evidence of classroom performance to a set of peers. Those peers will use standardized rubrics to evaluate that evidence of classroom performance and then determine if they will award a credential or not based on that. Most educators find this really valuable because peer feedback is something that people put a lot of stock in, right? So if I can show you what I'm doing in my classroom and I can get feedback from more experienced teachers, maybe help me figure out some challenges that I have, that's really valuable to me. And these programs are supported by major brands and major organizations. You can see a few of them here. And these are accepted for for state level CE credit in over 30 states. And this is another Badger-backed program that shows, sorts of things you can do with micro-credentials that are not necessarily tied explicitly to traditional types of assessment.